Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Flight, and this is just going to be a fairly brief overview of the research process for conducting a specific research problem project. This would be a part 2 of the Managing Market Information chapter, which is chapter 3 in the textbook. Okay, so again, thank you for watching. Touch base with me if you have any questions. Thanks. All right, as we wrapped up class the other day, the thought that we left with was that the marketing research function is very often outsourced from a firm to some other market research company. So anyways, I wanted to leave you with a couple resources for the marketing research industry. So if you download these notes, you'll see a handful of links here. The Green Book, Quirks, Blue Book. The AMA has an actual part in their organization that deals with marketing research in the industry. This link is an old link. And so one of the things they used to offer was what's called the PCM, the Professional Certified Marketer Certificate. There's also the Insights Association, though, and the Insights Association has taken over the role as the professional organization for marketing researchers. So again, this just serves as a backdrop for some organizations that you could tap into if you're interested in market research and the market research profession. And also know that a lot of research, again, is outsourced from the firm. So again, you can pause this and take a look at these different forms or types of research that are done. These are techniques and methods that are used. Again, many of these will be outsourced outside the firm, but they also represent different techniques that are used. And that are growing and so forth as well. So again, the research process when we're thinking about project-based research can be very diverse and have a lot of different pieces and components to it, which would include lots of different ways to collect data as well. Just as a quick snapshot, I want to draw your attention to the to this chart, and this is a fairly recent chart from just the last year and a half or so, something like that, which indicates the different methods that are becoming more and more popular in order to create or gather data and create data sets. You'll notice that a lot of these deal with some type of mobile or handheld device types of things. We have online communities. We have a lot of social media ideas here, qualitative text analyses, and so on and so forth. So these would be emerging technologies as they relate to data collection. And as I mentioned, a lot of firms would outsource this. So moving forward then, and just to segue back from class the other day, this is part 2 of our research methods process. One of the things that you'll recall is that there's a multi-step process. So we talked in class, or I outlined rather in class, the 11 or the 6 steps that the textbook offers. And again, those 6 steps would be ones that condense a broader list of steps. And so this is that broader list. Different textbooks, again, will have maybe a different number of steps, but one popular scenario is to walk through the research process and looking at these steps. So unlike our little emoji here, don't be confused or worried or concerned. From your marketing research class, you have had exposure to all of these. So these should be things that are very familiar to you and that you're comfortable with. Please do review them and make sure that you kind of understand step by step the approach that you take. Again, I'm not trying to make anybody a market researcher, although it would be awesome if you decided to pursue that path. What I do want you to do is think of yourself as a manager who's going to use the information that's gathered from a process like this. So as the consumer of information, i.e. the manager, you should be familiar with how the data process, how the research process works. That's why it's important. All right, so quickly through these 11 and hitting on the high points of them. Step one is to establish whether research does indeed need to be conducted. So obviously research takes time and it costs money. And what we want to balance is an understanding of if it's worth our time and money to get the information that the research project may provide us. Okay, so step number one then, establishing whether there is a need to do the research at all. So when the research is not needed, so in other words, as a manager, when we don't need to spend the money or take this time to do the study, we don't need to do this if we already have the information available to us. If the timing is wrong, so in other words, we might not be ready or prepared to do research. If we don't have funds or funding or a budget to support research, then we should not be doing that. And if the costs outweigh the value of what we will glean from the marketing research. Okay, so again, question number one here through step number one is to ask whether we even need to do research or not. Step number two, assuming that we do need to do research and that we're willing to move forward with the project, is to define the research problem. So remember, this is the most important step. I'm going to underline this, the most important step. What is the most important step? Step number two, identifying the research problem. We know that if the problem is not defined correctly, then we're going to have lots and lots of problems. And we're going to spend a lot of money, waste a lot of time, and we won't be happy with what happens moving forward. Okay, so step number two. Step number three, establish our research objectives. Research objectives generally state what we're going to do and how we're going to solve the problem identified in step number two. Right, so we want to state what the researchers must do moving forward. And now this, of course, comes with a bit more experience because experienced researchers can think ahead, think forward, and actually project the entire process all at once. If you're starting out in research, it's hard to really do this step and really understand and know the nuances of what you're going to need to be able to do. Okay, so anyway, step three, establish objectives. Step number four, identify and be clear about what your research design is all about. So in research, we generally have three very broad categories of research that might allude to the design and also very much so the purpose of what research you're doing. So exploratory research is where we collect information in a somewhat unstructured or informal manner in order to learn what is already known about the topic and explore the topic moving forward. Descriptive research is where we collect data. It's usually primary data, and we use this data to describe our objects of interest. So we may be describing our market, describing our competitors, describing a process, but we're using data to describe numerically what's going on. Or qualitatively too. We could be describing in words too what's going on as well. The third level, or the third type of design then, would be causal studies, where we want to create a model and we want to be able to prove or disprove a cause-effect relationship between variables. So we think one thing causes another. We think increased advertising will lead to increased sales. That's a cause-effect relationship, so we need to measure the effect that advertising has on sales to prove that. So that's an illustration of a causal study. All right, step number five then, identify information sources and different types of information. So this is a big area, actually. We want to think long and hard about where our information, will come from, and in general sense, what the information will be. So primary information is information that is collected specifically for the process or for the project at hand. Yeah, primary data would focus on that. Secondary data is data that already exists in some form. It typically costs less, or at least is more accessible in a timely manner if we use secondary data. It can come from inside the firm or outside the firm, but it's data that already exists that we have access to. All right, step number 6, determining methods of accessing data. Okay, so data collection methods and procedures then. We want to think about how we're going to, like this is a collection plan, a data collection plan, or how we're going to access the data. It's what we want to think about here. So we may ask direct questions, so like interviews and that type of thing. We may use a interview form, but also integrate that with a tablet or a laptop or a computer, so computer-assisted interviews. We may have surveys that we launch that we let people complete on their own, and then we gather their information. So respondents are allowed to fill out the survey on their own without any feedback, things of that nature. We may use an MIS system, right? So we've talked about marketing information systems. That might be the case. Or we may download syndicated data and so forth. So we want to think here then where data is going to come from, sort of the process that we'll use to gather that data. Step number 7, we want to design data collection forms. Okay, so data collection forms. In this case here, we may be designing a questionnaire. So we'd have a series of questions. We're designing maybe an interview form or interview questions. So, thinking about what questions we're going to ask and how we're going to do those. So again, there's a lot of work that has to go into that, a lot of thought. We may be conducting an observational study, and if we're observing our subjects, then we need a form to be able to record our observations on that. But be sure that there are all kinds of software packages available for us here at SIUE. We have Qualtrics available to all the students for creating surveys, and those will be online surveys in that case. Or you can create the survey in Qualtrics, and then you could print it out and make paper and pencil copies of it if you wanted to do that. All right, so that's step number 7. Step number 8 is thinking about the sample. All right, so the sample involves the respondents who are going to complete your survey or provide the data and information that you're gathering. So who's going to provide that information? Who will your sample be? What will your sample be made up of? Generally speaking, we oftentimes want to define our sample within a population, and that sample sometimes is our market. Sometimes it's our market segment. Sometimes it's our competitors. Sometimes our sample are products in our product category, right? But we got to clearly define what our sample is based on our objects of interest. We also at the same time need to consider sample size. So sample size has a lot of impact on the accuracy of our study and the power of our study and its ability to find significant results. So sample has to do with how variable your respondents are within the data, how much variability is there. And there are some general rules of thumb that you can follow, but we need to know how many respondents need to be in the data set in order for us to run our statistical analyses. All right, so that's step number 8. Step number 9, we want to collect our data. We may have an outside firm do this for us. We can do it ourselves. We want to, as we're collecting our data, make sure our data is valid. make sure that it's as free from non-sampling error as possible. So what exactly is non-sampling error? Non-sampling error is error that's associated with the process of collecting data. So if you have mistakes, for instance, in your survey and your respondents don't know how to answer, those mistakes are projecting or providing some type of error that's in your data. Now, if we proofread our survey and we corrected those mistakes, then we could eliminate some of that error, right? So that isn't just a simple example of non-sampling error. We want to, throughout this process, try to eliminate as much of that as possible. Step number 9 in the 11 steps that we'll go through here, data analysis. Okay, so once we've collected the data, we've validated the data, we've confirmed its reliability, we need to use some statistical techniques to analyze the data, which will then help us interpret the data and create some type of insights for the client. All right, so lots of statistical software packages are out there. Here at SIUE, we have Excel, we also have SPSS. You can download R if you want to. It's a free software program for data analysis. And of course, there are many others as well, but those are ones that you're probably most familiar with. Step number 11, the final step here, is reporting, the reporting process. So we want to prepare and present our final research. Nowadays, when we're doing this, it's usually a audio-visual presentation. It may be simply in PowerPoint form where you've got graphics and visuals and charts and displays, and you're connecting the dots between what you were intending to do in your research problem and what you found out about your research problem, and then you're providing some insight and in terms of how what you found relates to the business at hand. So that would be part of this last reporting step that we would be involved in. So just to recap, this is the process then for conducting a specific or a like a project, a research project where you wanted to know one problem, you wanted to uncover maybe a solution or issue that related to one single project. This serves as part 2 of our discussion of research information, marketing information. And as a manager, again, the perspective I want you to have is from a managerial standpoint. Think about where data is coming from, think about how you're going to use it, and how it can help you do your job better as a marketing manager. So this wraps this up. If you have any questions, obviously touch base with me. I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you next in class.